So we're going to go ahead and get started. So as you can see, today's topic is about the House and the Senate and Congress. So let's get started. So as always, remember to follow Fiveable on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube with the handle @ThinkFiveable. It's a great resource, and we have, I believe, 19 subjects that we're offering streams for. And these 19 subjects, I mean, that's a lot of AP classes. So this will help you through sophomore, junior, senior year, and it's something that I think is really worth subscribing to. And please make sure you follow all of these handles so that you can get updates on everything that we're doing here at Fiveable and how we can, how you can get access to even more resources. All right, so before we actually get started with actual government stuff, a little bit about me. My name is Akash, and I'm a junior from North Carolina. I love politics and learning about politics and just keeping up to date with current events. And right now, even in the news, politics is always something that comes up. And even though it can be depressing, it can be sometimes negative, politics is really a great field, and the complexity of everything that's covered is super cool. I took the class, like I said before, as a sophomore, and I got a 5 on the exam, which is something I'm really proud of. And I know that you guys can get a 5 on the exam because you're on Fiveable. And I'm really excited about streaming. So this is actually my first stream. So hopefully all goes well. Let's get going. So today in this stream, we're going to talk a little bit about the College Board standards, just a quick overview about what they are. Then we're going to start going into bicameralism, working in Congress, and then a case study of the House and the Senate. We're going to end with congressional leadership and a chart, and then we're going to do some checkpoints throughout. All right, so this is just what the context is. So I really like including this part in all of my streams or all of my PowerPoints. We're talking about interactions among branches in the government, and as the title says, we're talking about the Senate and the House of Representatives, as well as the structures, powers, and functions of Congress. All right, so let's get going. So some questions for thought. What does bicameral mean? Do you know what bicameral means? Anyone? No, okay. So bicameral is a term for divided into 2 houses. So the United States Congress and every American state legislature except Nebraska is actually bicameral. So that's just kind of an interesting fact. And kind of to introduce this topic, does anyone know the differences between the Virginia plan, New Jersey plan, the Great Compromise? Have y'all gotten to that in class? Right, Virginia plan is for the large states. And then the New Jersey plan would be for the smaller states. So the Virginia, right, exactly. So the Virginia plan actually proposed a 2-house legislature. So they actually proposed a bicameral legislature, and they said that the representation in Congress should be based on population. So this was supported by the larger states because obviously the larger states had more of a population, so they wanted more representation in Congress. On the other hand, the New Jersey plan, they only wanted 1 house, and they wanted equal representation because the smaller states, if it was all based on population, they would never get any representation in Congress. So that was one of the main reasons why we decided to go with the Great Compromise. So the Great Compromise, basically what that proposed was that there would be a 2-house legislature, and the upper house would be equal representation, so 2 from every state, and the lower house would be based on population. Okay, and why is this important? This is just important because it is a true balance between what we need for the larger states and what we need for the smaller states. So this is super important to our government, and we're going to get into more detail throughout this stream. All right, so specialization of Congress. So the founders basically knew how complex legislation would be, and each section of the legislative branch has important and very significant roles. They're both very different, but they also have a ton of similarities. So does anyone right off the bat know any similarities or differences that the Senate, between the Senate and the House? All right. So the House of Representatives, we're going to get into all of this, but the House of Representatives, as I said before, is based on the population, and the Senate is equal. Right. Exactly. Okay. So working in Congress. So obviously working in Congress would be a really great job, I'm sure, but it's also very difficult. There are a ton of perks that you get with working in Congress, and kind of everything revolves around political power. So in our country, political power is something that's debated, something that's the focus of anything the Supreme Court almost is based on political power. So this is really super important. And they get to make key decisions on important matters of public policy. A lot of times, the people in Congress are making decisions for the rest of the population. So that means that their ideas or what they believe could really influence the decisions they're making. And additionally, there are a lot of benefits as part of the job. So we kind of think about when we go to work, like insurance and that kind of stuff, just like that. There are so many benefits to working in Congress, and this makes it a really attractive job for a lot of people. Okay, so here are some perks for members of Congress. So the salary definitely is huge. It's $168,500, and this is in 2007. So pretty sure it has gone up, but I'm not sure about that. But even at that time in 2007, that was 4 times the typical family income in the United States. So the typical family income in the US is around $40,000, $50,000. And just one congressperson makes almost 200,000. So that shows how much money they're making for the job that they're doing. Additionally, they get benefits for office and travel, both across the country to their constituencies, and they get a lot of office space. So these are just kind of things that are very general, but are still like important. The other thing, they get small privileges like flowers, research centers, exercise facilities, etc., just like many other jobs that we get, like they get a gym inside Capitol Hill. And additionally, one thing that I definitely think we should point out is the franking privilege. The franking privilege, basically what that is that it's a free use of a mail system. So they are able to communicate with their constituents for free. A lot of times you will see this term on the AP exam. It's not always used like as the correct answer choice. Like the question might not be asking for that, but a lot of times there are a lot of terms like franking privilege, pork barrel legislation. All of those are kind of put together in a multiple choice question. So I definitely know what franking privilege means, because if it's not the right answer, you can easily strike it out. And normally it's one of the first ones that you can strike out. So again, the franking privilege is the way that Congress people can communicate with their constituents. So that is super important. All right. So the next slide. All right. So this is a little checkpoint. So if somebody we could all like kind of go through this, but something that I know one of my teachers does at school is put checkpoints throughout the PowerPoint. That way we're kind of interacting and we know what we've covered and we're kind of reflecting on what we've covered. So does anyone know the answer to number 1? What was the solution to the legislative branch that was agreed upon in the Great Compromise? You can just type it in the chat. All right, so yes, so the House and the Senate. So the term for that, like we said, is bicameralism. So, right, the House and the Senate was a solution to the legislative branch that was agreed upon in the Great Compromise. But one of the key concepts that's called, basically split into 2, is bicameralism. Okay, the second one, what privilege allows members of Congress to send free mail? Right, franking privilege. So again, like I said, this is kind of important, especially on the AP exam multiple choice questions. And we already went through that the 2 houses of Congress are the House of Representatives and the Senate. So good job. I'm sorry, Sandra, like we're kind of relying on you for the chat. Okay. So members of Congress. So in total, there's 535 members of Congress. Like we said before, states are represented equally in the Senate and by population in the House. And there's different requirements for being like a senator or for being a representative. So we'll go through these on the next slide. But there's a total of 100 members in the Senate. So that's the 50 states times 2. And then there's 435 members in the House of Representatives. So there's 1 per congressional district. So in total, like each state is divided into a certain number of congressional districts. For example, like I think North Carolina, we have 13 or 17, something like that. So each state has a different amount of congressional districts. That number doesn't change. The number of districts does not change across the country. So there's always going to be 435 districts, but the census kind of determines how those districts are allotted between states. So if one state experiences like a huge gain in population during one census, then a state that experienced a huge loss would give up a congressional district to the other state. So that's another key fact, is that we always stick with that number of 435. So there's always going to be 535 voting members of Congress. There are a few non-voting delegates. So like Washington, D.C. and like our territories like Puerto Rico, they have a non-voting delegate. However, like the term suggests, like they can't actually vote. So we still consider the number of people in Congress to be 535. All right, so requirements to be in Congress. So the House of Representatives, you need to be at least 25 years old and be a U.S. citizen, have been a U.S. citizen for 7 years. So in Congress, being a natural born citizen, like it is in the like it is for the presidency, is not required. You just need to have been a citizen for a specified amount of years. For the Senate, you have to be at least 30 years old and have been citizens for 9 years. So each of these, as you can see, they have slightly different requirements. In the Senate, it's a little bit more. And all members of Congress must be residents from the state where they're elected. So if I'm being elected from the 1st Congressional District, North Carolina, I just need to be from North Carolina. I don't necessarily have to be a resident of the 1st Congressional District. So that's kind of the weird thing about the House. But the Senate, obviously, you still have to be a resident of North Carolina. All right. So one thing that we kind of go over within the course is, and to do with kind of like statistics and public opinion, like the unit you said you're on, is if Congress is truly representative. So they're not always typical Americans. Many members come from occupations with high status and a large income. So examples of this are like business and law. Additionally, there's not a lot of diversity in Congress as of now. So it's still 78% Caucasian, and well, I apologize. The current Congress is 78% white, and like in America itself, it's 61% Caucasian. So obviously there's a difference between those numbers, and quite a significant one. So as elections tend to go on, we do see a lot more diversity within like Congress, especially the House of Representatives. All right, so now we're going to kind of move into our actual legislative structure. So the bicameral legislature is a legislature that's divided into 2 houses. So this is something, like we said before, it's super important because it provides balance to our political structure. Again, every state but Nebraska has a bicameral legislature. So that is something that you kind of want to think about. The Electoral College, again, there's different ways to that also, but these are all key concepts that you need to kind of remember. You're not going to be tested on like what state does not have a bicameral legislature, but it is important to know with the theme that in general, the legislature, U.S. state legislatures and the federal legislature is bicameral. The bicameral legislature also acts as a check and balance. Does anyone know why that could be a check and balance? Just it being separated out into the Senate and the House, why that could be a check and balance? All right, so the reason why it's a check and balance is that actually for a bill to be passed, it has to pass through both the House and the Senate. So in order for it to pass through the House and the Senate, that's like just in of itself a check and balance. Yeah, so next we're kind of going to go more in detail into the House of Representatives and the Senate. So before that, does anyone have any questions about what we've covered so far? So I'm going to wait like a few more seconds. All right. So next, we're going to talk specifically about the House of Representatives. The House is based on population, not equal representation. The Senate is based on equal representation. So that's like kind of a key fact that I'm going to like keep reiterating throughout this presentation, just because that's like the most important thing. Like if you don't get anything else out of the stream, I definitely want you to get that the House is the House is based on population and the Senate is based on equal representation, because that is the main difference between the two chambers, and that's really what makes up all of the rest of the differences. So if you can get that logically, you can really understand every other difference that there is. All right, so every 10 years, a census is taken, like I said earlier. Does anyone know what a census is? All right, so the census is basically like if you're in stats, you know that a census tries to get a sample of every member of the population. So a census happens every 10 years in the United States. So the last one was in 2010. The next one will actually be next year. And if you've kind of actually paid attention to current events, there's actually controversy going on with a question that could be asked on the census next year. So I encourage you to look this up. Another thing that I kind of going off topic, but I really recommend is staying up to date with current events about politics. A lot of times in your free response questions, if you're able to reference a contemporary or modern example, that will help you tremendously in being able to develop your essay, especially the final essay, the argumentative essay. We are going to have more and more streams about how these FRQs are structured, but definitely paying attention to key events, political events, events relating to Congress, Supreme Court, President. All of these can be super helpful when you are writing your FRQ at the end of the year on the AP exam, because you are able to reference what you've learned and provide a real life example. And that only backs up your claim even more. All right. So the census determines the number of congressional districts in each state. And so we have the census. I'm sorry, I didn't see your thing earlier. So yeah, when they go to your house and ask a question, exactly. So they go to a ton of houses across the country and basically try to get a representative sample. And yeah, the citizenship question is the one that's kind of under controversy right now. So right, let's keep going. So there's 435 congressional districts in the United States, which is why there are 435 representatives in the US. And gerrymandering is something that can occur. So gerrymandering is basically when the state legislature draws lines unfairly to benefit a certain political party. In truth or in morality, that's not supposed to happen. However, it does, because it's drawn by state legislatures, which can be Republican or Democrat, and often they favor the drawing of lines favors the party that's in control of the state legislature. So that's something that you can pay attention to even within your state. All right. So the House. More about the House. So the incumbent re-election rates are very high in the House, more than 90%. So there's something called an incumbent advantage. A lot of times incumbents get a lot more media attention, and media is the only way that they can really communicate with their constituents. So because incumbents get such media attention, a lot more funding from like the parties. That's the main reason why there's such a high reelection rate. It's actually more than 90%. A lot of times, many like people, they have safe seats, especially in like California, the Democrats, and Texas, the Republicans. A lot of times these people have been serving 20, 25 years in the House of Representatives because their seat is protected, because it's going to always go Democrat or always go Republican. There are elections that are held for all seats every 2 years, and they take place within that congressional district. So this is also a key difference between the Senate and the House. An incumbent. Okay, good question. So an incumbent is the person that's already like in the House. So like if I ran in 2016 and I was elected into the House, I am now an incumbent. And when I run for re-election again in 2018, someone else is going against me and I'm the incumbent. Does that make sense? So incumbent is a person that's already there, and their competitor is trying to beat the incumbent. All right, so hopefully that makes sense. It's kind of confusing, especially at the beginning, but that's the incumbent advantage is something that you can use to remember. So like the people that are already in Congress have a much higher chance of being reelected because they have that incumbent advantage, especially with money and funding. All right. So what makes the House different? So what do we know? How many members does the House have? $535 is actually the number of the entire Congress, both the House and the Senate. And since we know that it's 100 in the Senate, it's 535 minus 100. So there's actually 435 members in the House. And do you remember how many years the term of office is for the House? It's all on you, Sandra. Right, 2. So there's the House, they have a relatively shorter term limit or term length, so it's only 2 years. The revenue bill, this is a really important fact, and I like 90% this will be on your AP exam somehow, some way. Revenue bills must start in the House of Representatives. So anything that has to do with money or taxation has to start in the House of Representatives. The reason for this is because the House is closer to the people. So like the people that you're electing to the House, they probably live in your district, very close to you. So because the House of Representatives is much closer to the people, all revenue or taxation bills have to start in the House of Representatives. So this is a really key fact. And if you're like taking notes, I'd definitely write this down because it will be tested on the AP exam. And we'll see in like some release questions right after this that it's on there as well. All right, so the other thing is that the House can bring impeachment charges. So the impeachment process is actually 2 parts. The House brings the charges, so the House votes on it, and then the Senate is the one that actually tries the impeachment to see if they are actually going to be impeached. So the House has to agree to what's called the Articles of Impeachment, and then the that kind of like creates an inquiry, whereas the Senate actually holds a trial, and we'll learn more about that. Another thing, right, so from there, yes, it does go to the Senate. So the revenue bills have to start in the House, but then all bills must be passed by the House and the Senate. So even though it has to start in the House, the Senate also has to approve it. Does that answer your question? All right. And the next thing is that this is kind of like a little obscure fact that it's not like something that's common or going to occur all the time. But if there is not a majority in the Electoral College, which means like nobody reaches that 270 threshold, the House of Representatives actually chooses the president. So like sometimes that I don't think that situation has ever happened, but this is something that you might need to know. The House chooses the president if nobody gets that 270 or nobody gets the majority in the Electoral College. And we know that there's 435 members and their term of office is 2 years. So some more things about what makes the House different. It's less prestige. So it's the lower house of Congress. There's so many more people, so it's not considered as prestigious. In the Senate, it's like considered a step up. So if you're like a lot of times you'll see House of Representatives running to be a senator, and you won't normally see it the other way. So the House is associated with less prestige. The other big thing is that this is something that the college board standards emphasized, is that there's limited debate and more rules in the House of Representatives. So the reason why it is this way, I'm just going to answer the question, is that there's so many more people in Congress. So if you had 435 members, all of them wanting to debate a bill and talk about it, Congress would take so long to do anything. It already takes, the process is super long. If all 435 members wanted to add an amendment to a bill, it would be very tiring very quickly. So that's a main reason why the House has many more rules and there's limited debate. It's called a closed rule process, which means that the amount of amendments that can be added onto a bill is closed. So there's not an unlimited debate or unlimited amendments that can be added. That's something that you'll see is very different from the Senate because the House has more people. The next thing is that the committee system is much more influential. So what the committee system is, if you kind of tuned into Ms. Johnston's review earlier this week, is it's a way that it's basically a way in which Congress is organized in order to help them get tasks done. So there's committees on basically everything, like a committee on agriculture, a committee on foreign policy or foreign affairs. So there's a committee on each type of thing that Congress would have to deal with, and bills go to the committees that they relate to. So the committee system is much more influential, again, because there's so many more people. There's something called the House Rules Committee, which is something you want to be familiar with. And the House Rules Committee is what makes all of these rules, and it is the most powerful committee in the House. So I'm pretty sure you will be tested on this, but just know that the House Rules Committee is super important to the functioning of the House of Representatives. Something you'll see within this course is that, especially with Congress, is that logic can play such a big role. A lot of times you have like things that you're not sure about, especially on the multiple choice on the AP exam. If you just think about it logically, especially with like these things with limited debate and how there's more rules, since the House has more people, and if everybody started talking, it would be a lot to handle. There's more limits on debates and stricter rules. So if you just think about it logically and you're familiar with the key terms, a lot of times you can make educated guesses in AP government. And that's something that I would definitely emphasize. And another thing is to review your vocab terms. So we kind of went over the franking privilege thing a few minutes ago, but another thing, closed rule and how that's associated with the House, the House Rules Committee and how that's associated with the House. All of these things, if you put them on flashcards, put them on Quizlet, and try to study, they will help you so much on the AP exam. All right, so next we're going to get to the Senate. If my slide will move. All right, so does anyone know anything, like any background information about the Senate? So what do you already know about the Senate? And maybe how it's different from the House. Right? Equal representation. And yeah, so again, that's the main difference. So like it asked, well, this question asked this, but is the Senate based on population or equal representation? Equal representation, always, always, always. Remember that. There's two senators from each state, right? And that is, again, so then there would be 100 members in the Senate, 2 times 50. And elections for 1/3 of the Senate happen every 2 years. So this is kind of weird, but everything is kind of on a rotating basis. So a senator's term is actually 6 years. So like their entire term is 6 years, but they get their elections actually happen every 2 years. So like a third of the Senate, let's say, is elected in 2016. They wouldn't leave until 2022. And then the next batch that's elected in 2018, they wouldn't leave till 2024. So as you kind of see, like 1/3 is kind of coming in at a time. Basically what this allows for is that there's a rotation and there's mentoring. Because the Senate is the upper house in Congress, you don't want 100 inexperienced members that are serving their first term in Congress. So if you have 1/3 that rotate in and out, you give them a little bit of time to kind of get used to it, get mentoring from older members, and then before the next batch is rotated out. So that's something that you should know, especially that the senator's term is 6 years, and how that's different from the House's term being 2 years. The next thing, elections are generally more competitive, expensive, and high profile compared to other political offices. Compared to House races, Senate races are generally much more expensive. There are obviously exceptions, there's always exceptions, but Senate races are much more high profile because it's like the upper house. And like we kind of talked about, the Senate holds a little bit more prestige. So if you want to think about it that way, I know we just had a race, I think a Senate race in North Carolina a few years ago. That was like the highest costing Senate race ever. And then there was a House race also in I don't remember what state, but they were the highest costing House race. So a lot of times these races are so expensive. So if you want to be a political candidate, the cost that you have to pay and the fundraising that you have to do is immense. It's a lot. But the reward, as we saw earlier with the salary, all of that is pretty good. So it's a lot of times that's people's goals to be a politician, and it takes a lot of effort. So that's something that we'll consistently see throughout all these topics. To be a politician, it does take a ton of effort. All right. Next slide. What makes the Senate different? So like we talked about, the Senate is very different. So can someone tell me how many members there are in the Senate? 100, right? And how long is their term of office? 6 years. So again, those are two key differences from the House of Representatives. And the Senate acts as a jury for impeachment trials. So kind of going back to that idea of logic, the Senate has less people. So if you had the House of Representatives trying for impeachment and acting as a jury, you would have 435 people on a jury. Now, having like 9 people on a jury is hard enough. Think about 435, right? So since the Senate has less people, you can kind of associate it that way if you're having trouble remembering. Since the Senate has less people, they act as a jury, whereas the House together, since they represent the people the most, they bring the actual charges. So the House brings the charges and the Senate acts as a jury in impeachment trials. In order to actually convict, or for that impeachment to actually happen, for that guilty verdict, 2/3 of the Senate needs to agree on that. Another thing kind of related to what we talked about with the House, the Senate chooses a vice president if there is no majority in the Electoral College. So the House, again, since they're closer to the people, something I'm going to keep emphasizing is that the House, they are more representative of the people, so they're closer to the people. They choose a president, basically the main person, and then the Senate, they choose the vice president. Since, I mean, obviously the vice president's also main, but yes, they are choosing the vice president. The next thing, next really important thing is that they must ratify treaties with a 2/3 vote. Yes, a 2/3 vote. Ratifying treaties, does anyone know what a treaty is? Right, it is like an agreement, and treaties are generally agreements between two different countries, and these formal treaties, right, agreement between two or more countries. So, and yeah, two or more parties too, I guess. But like if the United States and England were trying to agree on something, this would be a treaty, and Congress, specifically the Senate, would have to approve it with a 2/3 vote. That's something that's really important because the president is normally the one that's negotiating the treaties and However, he has to always think about what Congress and what the Senate would say, because the Senate is the one that's ultimately going to ratify that treaty so that it would go into effect. So that's something that you should really be thinking about. Really what the president should be thinking about. Additionally, a lot of times something that you'll see is that major things that involve other countries or major changes to the US government will be done by the Senate. So like you can see with the executive branch, they're the ones that act as a jury for impeachment with with ratifying treaties. And we'll see in a minute how they're the ones that give advice and consent for presidential appointments. So they're the ones when the president appoints someone to the Supreme Court, the Senate must approve them in order for them to take office. Otherwise, that nomination gets thrown out. So if you a few years ago when President Obama was leaving office, I think just around a year before he left office, there was a death on the Supreme Court. So I believe it was Justice Scalia. So President Obama wanted to appoint someone before he left office. So he appointed Merrick Garland. However, the Senate refused to actually nominate him or approve him to serve on the court because they believed that in another year there would be another president. So at that point, even though President Obama nominated Merrick Garland did not get onto the Supreme Court because the Senate did not approve him. So that's a major check and balance that Congress has is over the executive branch, is that they have to approve presidential nominations. This is not only presidential nominations to the Supreme Court, but it's literally presidential nominations to anything ever. So for them to serve on a cabinet, so like the Secretary of State, Secretary of Energy, Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, all of these have to be approved by the Senate with that 2/3 vote. Additionally, all federal judges, so not only Supreme Court judges, but like district court judges, circuit court judges, all of these judges have to be approved by the Senate. So a lot of times we only see the high profile ones like the Supreme Court nominations because the other ones tend to go through pretty quickly. But you have to remember that all federal, basically anyone that the president appoints, the Senate has to confirm them. All right. And yeah, we went over how they have 100 members and their term in office is 6 years. Okay, a little bit more about what makes the Senate different is the filibuster and the cloture. Does anyone know what the filibuster or cloture is, or have you heard about the filibuster or cloture? All right, so what the filibuster is, and my mouse will work. There you go. So a filibuster is basically what happens, and it can only happen in the Senate. So this is something that was actually within the College Board description that I took straight off, but the filibuster only happens in the Senate. So the filibuster is basically when opponents of a piece of legislation try to talk it to death. So what happens is, let's say a Democrat puts forward a piece of legislation, and it's unpopular among Republicans. What Republican senators can do actually is stage a filibuster. Basically what they do is they just talk and talk and talk until the people that want the bill to be passed are like, okay, it's not worth the effort, and they stop. Like, that's literally what a filibuster is. I believe Ted Cruz did a filibuster a few years ago when he read Green Eggs and Ham. So like, it can be anything. They can talk about whatever they want. And like, people have done filibusters for like over 24 hours where they just talk and talk and talk so that this bill does not pass. So basically the point is that they talk the bill to death. So, but this can only happen in the Senate. So a lot of times this happens on really controversial bills when Republicans and Democrats are like on completely opposite sides and they don't agree with each other on anything. And basically what needs to happen in order to stop the person from talking and talking and talking is for there to be a 3/5 supermajority vote. So if 3/5 of the Senate can agree to stop the filibuster, then it's called a cloture. So a cloture, like close, is to close their mouth and stop them from like talking, and the bill passes basically. So the filibuster, its aim is to get the bill from not passing. The cloture, with a 60% vote in the Senate, it stops the filibuster so that the bill can pass. So kind of just think about that. These two terms are always associated with the Senate. It cannot happen in the House of Representatives. Right. Right. And like Sandra said, I don't know if you typed it just now, but I wasn't looking at the chat. But yeah, when a person talks to prevent the passing of a law is a filibuster, cloture stops the filibuster. Right. So we're going to do basically fill out a chart. It's kind of a big chart, but it's really helpful. And maybe at the end, I will put the, what's it called? I'll put the link up on this stream thing, because it's my first stream, so I have to kind of figure out how to put the link up, but I will give you the link so that you have a copy of the chart. But if you want to screenshot the chart when it's complete, that would be perfectly fine. It's a great way for you to basically know all of the key differences between the House and the Senate. All right, so a lot of this stuff we've like reiterated so many times, but that's good. So who can tell me basically like how many members there are in the House and the Senate? 435 in the House, right? And how many in the Senate? 100. Great job. So yeah. Next, what are some specific constitutional powers for the House and the Senate? So there are a few powers that, or not a few powers, few powers. I don't know what I'm saying. There are a few powers that are specific to the House and specific to the Senate. Can you name any of those? All right, we'll go through them. That's okay. But in the House, revenue bills must start in the House. So remember, please think about this. Please note this down. Remember this. It will be on your AP exam. The House always has to start all revenue bills. Revenue bills, they do go through both houses, but they must start in the House of Representatives. Additionally, the House must pass all articles of impeachment. So they start the impeachment process, and the Senate finishes it with the trial. And the trial is basically what convicts them of like wrongdoing or not. Additionally, the Senate, they provide advice and consent for presidential nominations. So without the Senate's approval, that's okay. So without the Senate's approval, basically it can't happen. The presidential nomination can't go through. Ratifying treaties, that's also only the Senate's job, a main difference from the House. And we talked about the trial, and filibuster and cloture. So those two terms always only go with the Senate. All right. Next question. Next slide. The term of office, I just kind of went through it because we went through it so many times, but the term of office for the House is 2 years, and the term of office for the Senate is 6 years. Seniority. So which one is the upper house and which one is the lower house? Right. Senate is the upper and House is the lower house. So you kind of have a little bit more prestige in the Senate. Another thing we kind of went over, but not too much, is that there's and this is actually, yeah, that's right. So there's not as much turnover in the House because of what's called the incumbent advantage. The people that are already in Congress, they tend to get reelected a lot because they're in safe districts. So there's not as much turnover or new people coming into the House compared to the Senate. The Senate, it's not like all 100 of them keep switching out all the time, but it's moderate turnover. So there's a little bit more turnover than in the House because there's only 2 per state. All right, so some other things with procedures. The House, it's limited debate. So basically, because there's more people, the debate is limited because you don't want, again, with logic, you don't want 435 people all arguing about this one bill because then nothing would ever get done. The other thing, there's limits on floor amendments and kind of the same logic with you don't want so many people, each one trying to put an amendment, and then you come up with a bill with 435 of them. The other thing, basically the opposite of that, there is unlimited debate generally with the Senate. All right, does anyone have any questions on the chart? All right, let's keep going. So could everyone kind of read the question and maybe think about what you think is the answer? This is a release AP government multiple choice question. So this would mirror something that you could see on the AP exam. And then in the chat, if you could just kind of put down what you think is the answer. C. Okay, so the answer is actually B. So the reason for this is that, remember, all revenue bills have to start in the House of Representatives. So the House is closer to the people, so that's why all revenue bills start in the House. Do you know what revenue is? So revenue is actually anything that has to do with money or taxation. You're right. So anything to do with money. So the answer is B, because any money bills, like you can just think about it, when they say revenue, like they mean money. So anything to do with money is like super important to taxpayers and all citizens. So since the House of Representatives is closer to the people, that's why all money bills have to start in the House of Representatives. So the answer would be B, because that says, according to the U.S. Constitution, all revenue bills must originate in the House of Representatives. So again, this is something super important that I would recommend you write down or store in your brain, but it's true that all revenue bills have to start in the House of Representatives. All right, so we have a few more questions. Okay, I'll take a second. This is a little bit long, but if you could read the question and then let me know what you think. Right. So the answer is A. So the reason why it's A is because there's so many people in the house, it's easier for it to be, or it's necessary in the house for it to be organized like that. So everything is organized into committees and it's super cut and dry, so that there's not like it's, I guess, easier and more manageable. In the Senate, there's less people, so the committee system is influential, but not as much as the House. So the answer to this question is A. Good job. All right. So a new type of multiple choice question that College Board kind of used last year with the AP exam. So like the AP exam that I took last year was the first redesigned exam, and then they kind of redesigned all AP courses again. So this type of question started to be asked last year on last year's exam, and I'm pretty sure it will be on this year's exam also. And this is probably the main place where you will see this content being tested. So the content where the House and the Senate are compared, it is the type of content that was on the released, or that's where this content was tested on the released AP exam. So it's basically a table. So what I've done is kind of taken a released multiple choice question and put it into a table, so you can see what it's like. So if you could go through and see what you think is correct. And again, remember, this is an actual like AP exam question. So if you can do these, you will be on your way to getting a 5 on the exam. Right, you're right. It's C. This one is it's an easy question, but a lot of times what you'll see with College Board across all AP exams is that they put words that are complicated or they make the wording difficult, so it's harder to kind of get what you want out of it. So really, all C is saying that it's based on population in the House and it's equal representation, or it's for the whole state in the Senate. So if you know that fact, just by doing a little bit of like reading, just make sure that you read all of the answer choices, and you actually read like the entire sentence, because a lot of times with the AP exam, they'll throw in words, like I said, like complex terms or stuff that to try and distract you, and sometimes it could be the right answer. So just don't get tired, especially with this multiple choice section, of making sure that you read all the answers. The time limit here is for the AP exam is pretty quick. I believe it's 1 minute per question or less than a minute per question. I'm pretty sure it's about 1 minute per question, but make sure that you're reading all of the answer choices so that you don't make any errors that you could have possibly avoided. And yep, like you said, the answer is C. All right, so the last kind of topic that we're going to talk about is congressional leadership. So congressional leadership is very important, and it's a way that Congress is organized. So the leadership does vary between the House and the Senate, but it is pretty much, there are some commonalities, some similarities. So we'll kind of, again, explore this through a chart. So if you want, you can just take a minute to read the chart, and then I'll go over it. And then meanwhile, what I'll do is I'll put this presentation into the chat. Just kidding. I'll do that after, because I think it'll change your view on the screen. Okay, so now that you've had like a minute to go look at the chart, basically there are several differences between the House and the Senate in terms of leadership. The main leader in the House is a Speaker of the House, and they're from the majority party. So they're elected by the majority. Generally, they're elected by the majority party. And I kind of have it as the actual leader because there is a House majority leader, but the Speaker of the House is the most powerful person in the House of Representatives. On the other hand, in the Senate, the leader of the Senate is in reality, it's the vice president. That's really their only role, according to the Constitution, is that they're the leader of the Senate. They're the president of the Senate. However, they really don't have much of a role. It's like an honorary title. All they do really is break ties when there's 50-50 votes, like on those nominations or treaties. Normally they'll vote with the president because they're in that party. However, the real actual leader of the Senate is a Senate Majority Leader. So right now the Senate Majority Leader is Mitch McConnell, I believe, and he's generally the most powerful person in the Senate. The House and the Senate, those leaders both have several responsibilities. With the House, they influence committee assignments. So committee assignments, like we learned, are super important within the House of Representatives. So that's a huge power that the Speaker has. Additionally, they also appoint party legislative leaders. So this can be something that the Speaker in the House, again, it's something that's very powerful. Like we learned about at the beginning of the presentation, everything in Congress revolves around power. So the Speaker of the House has more power than most of the other representatives. Additionally, with the Senate, you also have them influencing committee assignments, and they're aided by the majority whips. So the whips is it's kind of a weird term that we don't normally hear about who the whips are in the party, but they do play an important role, especially in votes. So if you kind of look at the bottom, you can see that there's both majority and minority whips in the House and the Senate. And basically what their main job is to round up votes from their party. So when there's an important vote that's about to happen and you have people that are undecided in your party and they might vote the other way and it's super important, it could be 50-50. The whips are the ones that are responsible for getting these people to vote for your party or to vote on their side. So you have majority whips and minority whips. These people, they go to the people that would be undecided or that have influential votes in order to get them vote one way or the other. So the whips do play a very important role. Another thing that the College Board kind of emphasizes, as you can see at the bottom, hopefully my picture isn't blocking it, but which one is more decentralized, do you think, the House or the Senate? Kind of a AP World term, but which leadership structure do you think is more decentralized? Right, it's the Senate. The Senate is more decentralized because they don't have as many people. That's something that you want to think about. The House, on the other hand, the House Rules Committee makes it much more centralized. And yeah, so that's something that you want to associate with the House all the time is the House Rules Committee, because they are so powerful within the House that you definitely want to remember their role. All right. Next slide. And okay, so this is we're kind of coming to the close of the presentation, but something I want to point out is that you should print out the Constitution like now. So look up a copy of the Constitution, a PDF. There's so many on the internet. Copy and paste it into a Word document and just print it out. This will be so helpful at the end of the year. But what you should do as you work through each branch of government, either through fileable or through like your class, annotate the corresponding article. So Article 1 is legislative, Article 2 is executive, and Article 3 is the judicial branch. All of these are so important. All of the powers and roles that are listed within the Constitution are so important. And the Constitution is one of the key foundational documents for your AP exam. So you have a list of required documents on the AP exam that you're required to know. The Constitution is one of them, and it's the foundational document for everything you do in the course. AP Government and Politics in the United States is based on the Constitution. So I would highly suggest you print out a copy of the Constitution and just annotate. As you do the legislative branch, annotate Article 1. Executive, annotate Article 2. Judicial, annotate Article 3. It will really help you get a comprehensive understanding of everything that you're doing within the class. All right. So another thing, I know this is probably super tiny, but this is exactly what College Board says you have to know about this topic. So what we're going to do is kind of work through it as a checkpoint and see if we can answer these questions, because if we can, we're prepared for success on the AP exam. So the first blank, the Senate is designed to represent states blank, while the House is designed to represent the blank. Can anyone fill in the blanks? Right. So the Senate is designed to represent states equally, and the House is designed to represent the population or the people. Exactly. Good job. So like we've emphasized throughout this presentation, the House is closer to the people, and that's why, again, like we said, revenue bills start in the House, and the Senate is representation of people equally, or of states equally. So there's 2 per state. The next blank, different chamber sizes and constituencies influence the blank of debate. So this blank can be kind of and you could say different things, but just a general idea of what you think would fit there. All right, so basically what I would put here is formality. So I know we kind of talked about it. It's hard to put it into one word, but the House, it's because it's larger, the debate is much more strict and it's closed rule debate, like we said. Whereas the Senate, there's less people, so there's more opportunities for amendments on bills, and there's the debate is more open. All right, there's the next 2 blanks. Coalitions in Congress are affected by term length differences. So how many years is a House term length and how many years is a Senate term length? 2 and 6, exactly. So the House is 2 years and the Senate is 6 years. Great job. All right, to kind of close everything out, these are the upcoming streams again. So tune in for the bill to law process, which is kind of the next thing in this unit. Some required Supreme Court cases that you have to know for the AP exam for your response. There's a whole essay basically dedicated to about 15 Supreme Court cases that you're required to know. Then again, on October 8th, Fatima is presenting the powers of the presidency as we move into the executive branch. And again, checks and balances with the presidency with Ms. Johnston. So does anyone have any questions, concerns, feedback? All right. Thank you so much for attending, and make sure that you follow Fileable on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, and I look forward to seeing you guys again. Thank you. And I'll be putting the link to the presentation in the chat momentarily, so if you want to stick around for that, you can, so that you can access these later. All right, so you should be able to see the presentation on a green button right below me, and it's in the chat. So thank you so much for attending, and I'll see you next time. Bye.